Hello and welcome. My name is Gracie Huerta. I am the Public Education Coordinator for the City of Santa Barbara Fire Department, Office of Emergency Services. Getting the important message out about disaster preparedness to as many Santa Barbara residents as possible is one of the top priorities for the City Fire Department. You are tuning into our 4th episode about disaster preparedness. We want you to get ready, Santa Barbara. So we hope you are able to join us in the weeks to come to learn about some of the things that you can do to keep you and your family safe in the event of a disaster. These shows will leave you more prepared if you're faced with an emergency. If you're interested in more comprehensive training, the Santa Barbara City Fire Department conducts CERT 4 times a year. CERT will give you a hands-on opportunity to practice what you've seen on TV. If you're interested in bringing CERT to your workplace or neighborhood, give us a call at 564-5703. Dominique Blocker, a resident of Santa Barbara, will be working with our city firefighters throughout this series, helping us learn to apply these lessons to our everyday lives.
And now we move on to shock.
So there's shock. In this show, we will be talking about disaster medicine. Disaster medicine is different from first aid. With disaster medicine, you identify the most injured and make sure that they get treatment first. We encourage you to consider taking a basic first aid course to supplement what you will learn in this show.
We're going to learn today just a few very simple
Our
techniques.
instructor will be Captain Chris Males from the Santa Barbara City Fire Department, and he will show us that by learning a few skills now, you can help in an emergency. Let's find out how we can get ready, Santa Barbara.
I'm here with Captain Chris Males from the Santa Barbara City Fire Department, and first off, disaster medicine. I don't have any professional medical training. I've never treated anyone in a disaster situation. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know that I can really be helpful.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to realize that everyone's going to be nervous. This is not a normal situation. When a disaster happens, even your rescuers are going to be stressed. It's an unfamiliar situation to have a disaster, luckily so. But a layperson with no medical training can perform very simple interventions on a patient that can absolutely be life-saving. And we always encourage somebody to take a CPR class. We always encourage people to take a first aid class. But we know that that's not a reality for a lot of people in this busy world. So we're going to learn today just a few very simple techniques that you can take home and keep in mind for the rest of your life, where you can make a critical difference in a patient at a disaster.
So there are a few specific tips that might apply to disaster medicine training.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So what are those? What can you tell me that I can take with me?
Well, the first thing we need to keep in mind is that you need to be concerned about yourself first.
Okay.
We're always concerned about the people that we service and the people that we come to visit after a 911 call is made. But firefighters, police officers, paramedics, everyone is first concerned about themselves. We need to discuss the role of rescuer safety, okay? Because if you become a victim, then you're not going to be there to help any patients.
And now I'm just one more person that the emergency responders need to take care of.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you've become what we call part of the problem. And we don't want a would-be rescuer to become part of the problem.
Okay.
So as you approach a disaster scene, you need to look at your safety first. Is this something that I can enter? Is this something where I won't be hurt? Do I have power lines down? Do I have unstable vehicles? Is there a gas leak? You need to look at those things before you run in and start treating patients.
Okay.
The other issue is that you need to protect yourself. Okay, once you've decided that there's no gas leak, there's no electrical wires down, you need to look at protecting yourself. You're going to be dealing with multiple patients with blood, with airway problems, and you need to protect yourself. But you're at home.
I was just going to say, yeah, I'm not going to have any special equipment with me.
You're not showing up with a fire truck.
Right.
Yeah, you're
so
at home.
Are there things that I can just kind of find that might be around
Absolutely.
me?
Everyone in their house has plastic garbage bags. Right. You have dish gloves underneath the sink. Okay. You have a long sleeve shirt that you can put on to protect yourselves. For example, just a normal grocery bag. Normal grocery bag over the hands works great. Plastic produce bag will work great. Again, you're not going to see your firefighters showing up every day with a produce bag over their heads or over their hands. but we have, we have tools that we can use. I'm going to show you our regular latex gloves, but these work in a pinch just fine.
Right, so I could, if I've got something on me, I can use this to protect my hand.
Absolutely.
From coming in contact.
You could take a rubber band and have somebody put it over your hands, and now what you've done is you've just made a glove for yourself, and you've protected yourself from blood and other bodily fluids that you could come in contact with.
Okay.
So regular garbage bags are better. They're a little stronger.
Okay.
And again, this is not the normal call. This is disaster medicine.
Right.
So if you're able to protect yourself with your hands, the other thing you want to think about is eye protection. Okay. Just a simple pair of glasses. Most people have glasses. Most people don't have safety glasses, but a pair of sunglasses will work to protect your eyes. Okay. And again, so if you think about a plastic bag over your hands, sunglasses, and maybe a long sleeve shirt, you'll be ready to go.
Okay, and like you said, this is for a situation that we've been kind of thrown into. So you really need to kind of change your mindset when you're going out there and treating and trying to help these people.
Absolutely.
So what can I do if I'm put in one of these situations?
Well, first of all, we've just talked about rescuer safety. Once you've determined that the scene is safe and that you're able to go in, you'll be able to help a great number of patients in a short period of time with some very simple techniques. And we're going to talk about those things. We have to take a step back, and we have to think about the fact that with the disaster, we may have more patients than rescuers. The patients outnumber the rescuers. Right. In your situation, off-duty, at home, very little training, you may encounter something where you have 7, 8, 10 patients by yourself. Right. So you're outnumbered. And with that situation, you have to take a step back and adjust the way that you treat patients. Okay. Very simple treatment. We're going to look at 3 things. We're going to look at their airway, make sure their airway is open and they're able to breathe. Okay. We're going to look to see if they have any uncontrolled bleeding. Patients are going to be bleeding, but we're looking at uncontrolled bleeding, free-flowing bleeding that hasn't stopped before you get to them.
Okay, because there's going to be a lot of blood, so
sure.
I'm really focusing
sure.
on the uncontrolled.
Uncontrolled bleeding.
Okay.
And then we're going to look at signs of shock. We're going to see if the patient has become shocky, and we're going to talk about a couple of things that you can quickly see that a patient's come into shock. And if we focus on those 3 things and those 3 things only, we'll be able to go from one patient to the next patient to the next patient very systematically and move through a great number of patients in a short period of time.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. When I walk on, into this situation, do I run to the person who's looks the most injured, is screaming the loudest? How do I make that judgment call?
And again, we've rehearsed a little bit for this, okay? When we, as a fire department, go into something like this, there's some very simple rules. And the first simple rule is that we walk in and we stop and look at the patient that's closest to us. Okay. Our first reaction is to see a patient that may be the bloodiest and go, we don't want to run over there. Okay, we want to start where we stand, which means we go to the first patient, and we're not neglecting the other patients, but we're going to move very systematically through them. Okay, so we'll start with the first patient or the patient that we're closest to, and we'll look at those 3 things that I said.
All right.
Airway.
Airway.
Uncontrolled bleeding, and signs of shock.
Shock.
Airway, breathing, shock. That's it. Those are the 3 things that are going to kill a patient.
Okay.
We would like to do more for them, but we can't. Remember, we've got more patients than you have the ability to handle.
Right.
So we're going to limit the care that we give the patient, and we're going to move on to the next patient. A very hard concept for even veteran rescuers to handle. Leaving somebody to go treat somebody else goes against the grains of everything we've learned.
So it's that different mindset.
Absolute
That's what I
different
have to focus
mindset.
on.
Exactly. So with those 3 criteria that we're going to look at, the airway, the bleeding, and shock, what we're going to do is we are going to categorize our patients by their level of care that they need. What we're doing is using the concept called triage.
Can you explain that a little bit more? Because that seems a little technical.
Big word. Yeah, triage is a French word that means to sort. And all we're doing is going through and we're sorting the patients.
Okay.
So we're going to use those 3 criteria, the airway, the bleeding, and the shock.
ABS.
And we're going to triage them and categorize them into 4 levels of care that they're going to need. The 4 levels are immediate, delayed, walking wounded, and dead. Unfortunately, we're probably going to have some dead. Now in the field, just so you know, we don't use the words immediate, delayed, walking wounded. We shorten it up a little bit. We actually use a color coding system. We actually use red, yellow, green, and black. So red is immediate, yellow is delayed, green is walking wounded, and black is dead.
Okay.
So we categorize them into 4, and we will say we have 3 red tags and 2 yellow tags. And that it relays to all the rescuers the level of care that these patients are going to need.
So even if I remembered something along those lines, and then when the emergency rescuers did come on, I could help relay that information to them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And very valuable information that we can just learn in just a couple of minutes, right?
Okay, that'll make things a lot quicker for you guys when you arrive. Now, I'm in this emergency situation, and I want to help. So I'm going to walk up to that first victim I see, like you told me, the first step. What do I do first?
Okay, as you walk into a building, and you've got a building or a park or what have you, and you've got multiple patients, the first thing we want to do before we ever touch a patient is to make an announcement that you want everybody who can get up and move towards you and get up and walk to come over and see you. So you make a very loud announcement. Anybody that can get up and walk, I'd like you to come over here and stand next to me. What you've done right there is you've sorted your first patients. You've got the patients that we call walking wounded up and moving towards you. You can do a couple of things with them right then. You can either ask them to help you, or you can have them go stand at a location and stay there so that when the rescuers show up, they know that this group of people was involved in the incident. So you've got the walking wounded up, you've got them walking towards you. You can either ask them to help or you move them to a different location. Then you start where you stand and you go up to your first patient.
All right. And now do I go in that order? The first thing that I'm going to look for is the airway.
Absolutely. The airway is always first.
All right.
An airway that is obstructed or closed is an absolutely critical emergency that you can fix in a second, and a second can make a difference.
Okay.
So let's try that.
Okay, so how do I address the airway on our example
what you can do is you can take your hand, put it on the patient's forehead, put your other hand on the patient's chin, and tilt the head back. Okay, and with that, with a patient that's unconscious, the most common form of airway obstruction is their tongue. So when a patient is unconscious, their ability to maintain their airway is compromised when their tongue falls to the back of their throat. So by opening their airway, you have lifted the tongue off the back of the throat, and they may start breathing right here.
Okay, so once you look for that, and say by doing that step, they are breathing, we move on from airway.
Right. We'll
because
move on
we
from
know
airway.
that at least that subject has been covered.
Right.
And we're going to go on to
uncontrolled bleeding, followed by shock. Now think about this though. If you've had to open the patient's airway, and then you're going to move on to something else, their airway may close. So we have to be creative. What are we going to do? We may want to just put something underneath their shoulders that holds their head open and their airway open.
So this is when, like you said, it's about getting creative and using what is around you. So
what's around you?
Someone has a towel or a jacket.
Exactly.
I can go ahead and position that underneath their shoulders here.
Exactly, and that keeps their airway open.
And then that's going to keep that open so they can continue to be breathing.
Continue to breathe, and you don't have to stay there and hold their airway open. The greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of patients. You can't, what we call tunnel vision in on one patient, neglecting the others that are there. So we'll put something underneath their shoulders to hold their airway open, and we'll move on from that patient. All right?
Okay, got it. So now say this patient, I see he has a lot of blood on him as well. So I've addressed his airway. I got to check for the bleeding aspect.
Exactly.
Okay,
and bleeding is scary to see. Patients in a traumatic scene are going to be bloody. What we need to differentiate, though, is a patient that just has some blood on their clothes versus somebody who's actively bleeding. That means you look and the blood is coming out of their skin and oozing and flowing. That's the bleeding that we want to take care of, the uncontrolled bleeding. There's 3 ways that we can stop bleeding. We can stop bleeding with direct pressure by putting pressure on the wound. We can elevate the extremity.
So the blood's not rushing towards
above the level of the heart.
Okay.
And we can also use what are called pressure points. Let's focus on the first 2. Okay. With direct pressure, we put pressure on the injury. We apply gentle but firm pressure.
This is where the gloves would come in handy.
Exactly.
Or my garbage bag or anything like that.
Anything that you have.
Okay, got it.
90% of bleeding can be controlled with direct pressure, just by simply putting your hand on it and putting some firm pressure on it.
I wouldn't have thought. That's amazing.
And who could you use to hold that?
One of the people who maybe was injured, but they were walking wounded.
Exactly. You've gotten one of the walking wounded. Hey, do you mind helping out? Absolutely. Here are some gloves. Here's a bag. Let's go ahead and hold some pressure on this. All right. So now you've controlled bleeding. So now you move on to the next criteria, which is
shock.
shock.
Got it. Okay.
Excellent.
Now, how do I look for that? Because shock is not something that I can, I can see blood and I can, look for the chest and feel the air coming out of their airway, but how do you find shock?
There's a myriad of symptoms that trained rescuers look for, but there's some very common symptoms or signs that you're going to see with a patient.
Okay.
One is an altered level of consciousness or a change in their behavior. And the first thing that happens is that the patient will become agitated. They'll become nervous, irritable, and agitated.
All right.
They also may become very thirsty, where they start, trying to, swallow, and it's, they're unable to. Their mouth is dry, and also their skin will become pale. Okay, the skin is what we call a non-essential organ, and when somebody goes into shock, the blood will flow away from the skin, causing the skin to become pale and sometimes sweaty.
So that's something that I can
absolutely.
see.
You look at a patient and you go, wow, this patient is agitated, irritable, and their skin color looks pale.
Right.
They just don't look right to me. And you often have to go with your gut feeling. You've never met this patient before. You don't know what their normal skin color is, but they just don't look right to you. They look a little pale. They look a little pasty. So when we get to that criteria, which is, again, we've dealt with the airway, we've dealt with the breathing, and now we're moving on to shock.
Right.
Very simple intervention. We're going to take their feet and we're going to elevate it 6 to 10 inches. We're going to use anything we can, a blanket, a piece of wood, a box, a cardboard box, for example. Anything that we can use to put underneath their feet, we just put right underneath their ankles. It lifts their legs up.
And then does the blood start flowing
what
down,
happens is it makes it hard for the heart to pump blood uphill.
Right.
So what happens is that the blood wants to naturally stay in the vital organs, the heart, the lungs, and the brain.
And that's what's important, because
what
we're trying to do is just keep them alive.
Keep them alive.
Keep them alive until someone with more training comes along.
Exactly. And there's a lot of things that firefighters, paramedics, of course, the hospital can do to treat shock. But at this point in the incident, we're going to focus on the most critical and quick interventions. Once again, doing the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of patients in the shortest amount of time, looking simply at their airway, uncontrolled bleeding, and shock.
Shock, ABS.
Good.
I'm not going to forget. Okay, so say I'm going to go ahead and raise their feet or legs 6 to 10 inches, you said?
Correct.
Okay. Is there anything else I can do to help someone who's in a shock state?
If you have time, one of the problems is that patients in shock have difficulty maintaining their body temperature. Because the blood is flowing away from their skin and back to their vital organs. You can cover them with a blanket, their jacket, anything that can keep them warm.
One of those things that I just find on the scene.
Something in your car, in your house, wherever you may be, somebody else's jacket, something like that. Again, blanket over them. Very quick intervention, but a very positive intervention.
Okay, and now that's a case where I've done everything I can do at that time, or the most I can do, and I've got to move on now to the next patient.
Exactly. And so again, you systematically move through. Let's talk about this patient. You walk up to them. They don't appear to be breathing. You open their airway with the head tilt, chin lift.
Right.
You listen, and feel, and they're not breathing.
Chest isn't rising.
Not rising. We're going to readjust their airway. They're still not breathing. Okay, this is a very difficult situation to be in.
CPR?
CPR if you had one patient, but this is disaster medicine. Greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of patients. We can't stop and perform CPR on one patient because we could be neglecting 20.
Right. Okay.
So at this point, this patient's dead. If it was just one patient, we'd focus all of our attention on it, but we can't do that. So this patient is dead, and we're going to move on.
Okay.
A tough situation to be in for not only a layperson, but even a rescuer that's been doing it for 24 years. It's a tough situation to walk away from somebody, but that's what you have to do in disaster medicine.
Because I need to help the people that I still can save.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the way the system is designed, is to help those that can be saved. It's not that you're ignoring this patient, but your resources, your limited resources, can be used much better by moving on to the next patient.
Okay, and is that one of the reasons that I want to follow look at the criteria in that order? Because airway, if the airway is, if I can't address that, I need to move on right then. Whether or not they're bleeding uncontrollably.
Yeah, if they don't have an airway, chances are the uncontrolled bleeding is not going to be real significant, because if they're not breathing, chances are they don't have a pulse, and they're probably dead.
Okay.
And so there won't be a lot of uncontrolled bleeding. You don't have to deal with shock. You simply look at the airway. You go, there is no airway. I've readjusted it. I've gone through my limited protocols that I've learned by readjusting that airway. This patient is too far gone to be able to save.
Okay, so in that order, airway, uncontrollable bleeding, shock, ABS. That's what I'm going to look for.
That's it.
Okay,
and
I
you're
just
move on.
Move on to the next person that I'm going to come in contact with.
And you will be absolutely surprised at how fast you can move through patients. We're going to do it in a little while. We're going to go through several patients. It's going to be intimidating. It's going to be a daunting task. You're going to look at me like there's no way.
Right.
And yet we're going to go through it in a few minutes, and I'm going to go, there you go.
Okay.
And you've done it. It was very, very limited training. Again, you don't have to be CPR certified. You don't have to be first aid certified. This is disaster medicine.
Okay, so just change that mindset, go in and do what you've taught me systematically, and I'll be able to help the most people.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Dominique, what we're going to do now is we are going to put into practice what we've learned.
Got it.
And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and systematically look at these patients and triage them according to
ABS, right?
ABS, exactly. Airway, bleeding, and shock.
Shock.
And when we talk about bleeding, we mean uncontrolled bleeding.
Okay.
Patients are going to be bloody, but is the bleeding uncontrolled, meaning the patient is actively bleeding. You see blood coming out of them and oozing out of them,
Okay.
and a large amount of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on doing the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of patients in the shortest period of time, using airway, bleeding, and shock. Okay? The first thing to remember when you come into a scene, and what we're going to be looking at here is what we call a multi-casualty incident, MCI or MVI, multi-victim incident.
Okay.
And we have a number of patients in front of us. What we have to remember is doing the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of patients in the shortest period of time. And that means dealing with a patient's problem and moving on. Something very different than we normally deal with in the field when we have one patient. We're going to treat a patient and we're going to move on. And in a situation like this, it's perfectly acceptable, and that's what we have to do. So the first thing to remember is, and we talked about rescuer safety also, you don't want to put yourself in danger. Okay, so we want to make sure that the scene is safe, and you take a good look around the scene, make sure it's safe, and then we're going to start where we stand. It may be your inclination to run over to who looks worse.
Right.
You're gonna jump over a bunch of patients to get to a patient who looks worse, and we don't want to do that. Okay. We want to start where we stand, and that is we start with the first patient.
Okay.
All right. We walk into a scene. There's our first patient. We don't bypass any patients to get to another one. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and go in. We take a quick look. We see that the scene is safe. We're going to come in and we're going to start where we stand. We come up to the first patient, and what I want you to do is I want you to say, whoever can get up and come over to me, please come over to me.
Okay, so this is something, maybe this was a major earthquake just happened.
Could be an earthquake. Could be a bus crash. It could be any number of things.
Okay.
But what we have is several patients down, and we are into the concept of triage, which is to sort. And so we're going to sort through these patients in a very short period of time, and you're going to be surprised at how fast it goes.
Okay, all right. I can do this. So I want to just try to call out and see if anyone can come to me on their own.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, if anyone can hear me and walk to me, come over here. All right, so we've got...
You got yourself...
We've got... Okay, you're going to follow me, and you can help me help treat these people.
You've got yourself a helper.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so at least we have one person. So now she's the next person I come upon.
Exactly. She's right there.
Okay.
You're not going to pass her up to get to somebody else.
All right. Okay, can you hear me? No, so I'm going to check her airway first. Got
exactly.
it.
Excellent.
Okay. All right.
You open her airway, you did a head tilt chin lift, and you
there.
hear her gasp for breath.
Okay.
She starts to breathe.
Okay, she's breathing now.
Excellent.
She is. But I can't stay here with her because I need to move
stay.
on.
And that's what your first reaction is that you want to sit here with her for as long as you can, but you can't because you're neglecting the other patient.
Right.
What can you do?
I'm going to put, here, look at, I'm going to take her towel.
Okay, put it under her shoulders, which keeps her airway open. Now, people are going to see this and they're going to say, wait a minute. I see on TV all the time where rescuers are holding a patient's neck and they put a collar around their neck. We don't do that in triage. We don't hold a patient's head. We don't worry about their cervical spine. Airway Airway problem comes first. We have to worry about the airway issue.
Right.
We don't have time to hold their head. We've got to move on.
Right, so we've got to at least just keep her alive.
Exactly.
Okay.
You put a towel underneath her shoulders.
Right.
Her airway is open. She's breathing.
Okay.
We're going to move on.
Okay, here we go. All right. So, next victim I come upon is right here.
Okay. Remember your concept.
First thing
Airway.
first, airway.
Uncontrolled bleeding.
Okay.
And shock.
All right, so first thing, let me check her airway. It doesn't look like she's breathing. Let me open her airway.
Okay, she's not breathing.
There's nothing.
Okay, there's nothing. All right, you've rechecked her airway.
Right.
You opened it, there was nothing. You rechecked it again, there was nothing. She's deceased. She's dead.
So there's nothing.
Really tough situation you're in right now.
Right.
If this was one patient, we'd be doing everything we can for them. But there's more patients that need our help.
Okay.
So she's dead. And we have to stand up and we have to move away from her.
Okay.
That's a tough situation to be in, even for somebody that's been doing it as long as I have.
Okay, so
I want to do everything I can for her. Right now, I've got to move on and do everything I can for the other patients.
All right.
Okay, so let's move on to the next
I
one.
have to move on. Okay. All right. So you come with me and let me try him. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So he's conscious. I'm going to move this off of him and just stay there. Here, will you help me? Thank you. Okay, now he's breathing because he's responding to me.
Good. Actually, his airway's open because he's talking.
But I see a lot of blood and it's active. It's coming out right now. So we need to put direct pressure on
Let's
it.
put direct
right?
pressure on it. Exactly.
Okay.
Who do you
maybe
have?
I have my volunteer.
Excellent. You've got
and
a
you have a
helper.
jacket. Apply direct pressure with your jacket on his wound and stay with him.
Now, as we've talked about, 90% of bleeding can be controlled with direct pressure.
Right.
Firm, steady pressure
Okay.
on the wound will slow down the bleeding
Okay.
within 10 minutes.
Okay.
And this patient is going to be dramatically better with a simple task of having your assistant, your volunteer, the patient you asked for right away
Right.
to come help you. Now you've got her doing a job, and just give her simple instructions and move on.
All right, so now she can stay and I can go help more people.
Good.
And here's my next person. All right, can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me? All right, so you're breathing, and the bleeding, I see that he has a wound, but it's not actively bleeding.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
So you've looked at airway.
I've looked at airway.
You've looked at bleeding.
I've looked at bleeding.
And now you're going to look to see if he's in shock.
He's not pale, and he appears to be breathing at a pretty steady rate.
Okay. Move on.
So I think he's
Move on.
okay for
Yeah.
now.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right. So now we've got the last person here. Can you hear me? Are you there? Okay.
Yeah.
So you're. All right. I'm going to help you. So she is.
We have an airway.
Good.
Okay.
Bleeding. I don't see any active bleeding.
Okay. And now we move on to shock.
So there's shock, but she does. She seems very agitated. She's breathing
She's
very
breathing
shallow.
fast. She's agitated. Her skin is very pale.
Right.
And that tells you that she's shocky. So what can we do for this patient?
All right, well, I want to get her head down. So I'm going to move, it's okay, I'm going to move this and put her head down. And then I need to raise her feet,
Okay,
right? So
good.
what if let's use
Perfect.
this
Perfect.
from the other victim. And I'm going to put it on here. It's okay, I'm going to put your feet up here to help you. And I'm going to rest them right there.
And that concept is that the blood is allowed to go back to her critical organs. By lifting up her legs, blood goes back into her critical organs.
Okay.
Her heart, her lungs, her brain, and will hopefully correct the shock that she's going into.
Okay.
All right, we've just spent maybe 3 or 4 minutes,
Right.
and you've gone through 6 patients.
Right.
Okay? Very daunting task at first, but as you start systematically going through it and limiting yourself to 3 pieces of information that you need to look at with each patient: airway, uncontrolled bleeding, and shock. By looking at just those 3 and taking care of those critical interventions, you're able to systematically move through these patients in a very timely manner, and you've just triaged 6 patients and saved the lives of multiple people here. So good job.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain Mills and Dominique, for talking to us about disaster medicine. Disaster medicine is very important, especially when the victims outnumber the rescuers. We ask you to help us get our message of preparedness out to as many people as possible. Encourage your friends and family to watch this program on City TV Channel 18 or watch it online at citytv18.com. Communicating with your family, friends, and neighbors, especially those who might need extra help, is extremely important. As a first responder, you'll need to help. and preparation can make all the difference. Remember, pre-plan, prepare, survive. Thanks for watching.